Hey, what's happening out there? Robert Phoenix with my good pal Heather Eland. Hi, Heather. How are you?
Good, how
Hey,
are you?
I'm good. So we're going to be talking about the new moon and the full moon this go round. We've got the new moon coming up in Sagittarius. We got a full moon coming up in Cancer, and this is the gateway to the holidays. This is the gateway to the solstice, and this is really officially the last uh, new moon and full moon for the year. Correct?
Yeah, not only is it the last new moon and full moon for the year, but it's the last lunar cycle before we're into eclipse season again in January. So this is the last, and this is kind of a break in the energy too. We were talking, off camera about the new moon and how it's a little bit chaosy and there's some weird energy going on around this time. But as we get closer and closer to the full moon, there's, really powerful, really positive aspects between some of the outer planets and some of the inner planets. And so, it's good vibes for the holidays, I think.
Yeah, I think it's good vibes for the holidays too. And you're right; it's a bit of a reprieve, so people may want to take advantage of this time and kind of rest up and relax and recharge and reconnect with family and friends and take part in the Sagittarius is a jovial sign,
Yeah.
and the new moon portends some joviality. You want to jump into the new moon now?
Yeah, of course. I'll share my screen so we can have the chart up for everyone who wants to see that. So yeah, this is the new moon in the sign of Sagittarius at 15 degrees. It's going to be exact overnight between Thursday and Friday for most people in the United States. And it's making the thing that I am interested in with this new moon is that the conjunction between Mars and Neptune, which we sort of talked about a little bit last time, is coming exact on Friday. So around the same time as that new moon. And it's making a pretty tight square with the new moon as well. So that's actually being highlighted in a pretty big way with this new moon. So I want to sort of get your take on what you think that might bring up.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind for me is I think people have to temper expectations.
Hmm.
When you've got a Mars Neptune conjunction, um, I mean, there's so much potential and possibility for things to occur. I mean, that's highly imaginative combination, and it can trigger everything from giddiness, excitation to even anxiety and fears, and in square with the sun and the moon, which are really personal planets operating in kind of a transpersonal space in Sagittarius. I think it's really important to stay grounded and keep your expectations sort of in check. I'll give you two examples. Let's say, for instance, you're supposed to go to a holiday party, and during this time, which would be not uncommon, right? You might have an expectation that the party could be a real bomb, a real stinker, really boring. That you have to go because it's a work-related event. Well, case in point, it may not be that way at all. It may be something really celebratory and fun and jovial. But what it does is it kind of rewires your expectations. On the other side of that, if you're really amped up about something, you think something's going to be really great and awesome and fantastic, you may want to pump the brakes on it a little bit and just kind of see where things go. I mean, I think that's sort of the nature of the energy. You kind of want to see where things go because we're dealing with mutable signs.
Yeah.
Pisces and Sag are mutable. So mutable means, changeable. You can edit things. You can edit things in real time. You're not stuck, right? So let's say, for instance, you do find yourself in a situation where you're at a party or you're at an event or something that you really, you did your best, you showed up, you were open. I'll see where this goes. As part of a mutable exercise, at some point you can get up and leave and go somewhere else, right? This is part of the energy. I just think this expectation piece is kind of a big part of this square. What's your take on it?
Well, yeah, that sort of reflects a lot of what I said in my weekly forecast when I talked about this energy of this new moon, where our expectations are likely to be quite high, especially if you look at the new moon in a wide conjunction with Jupiter as part of this configuration, right? Jupiter, and in the sign of Sagittarius, which is sort of far reaching and expansive and sort of looking toward these long-term, expansive, optimistic goals that are sort of way ahead of us. And I think with Mars involved with Neptune, we might be kind of jumping the gun and sort of jumping into things a little bit too quickly. And I think that's where we could be more prone to being let down, because there's this energy of urgency, right? With Mars square this new moon, where it's like, I have these big, expansive, idealistic goals and plans, and I just want to jump in and I want to do it. But maybe now is not the time to jump in, because we're about to enter into a period of sort of calm and, reprieve that we talked about. And then after that, we have eclipse season. And anytime eclipse season comes around, if you start something just before those eclipses, it's not likely to end up in the exact way that you think it is. So things are going to be changing at the start of the new year. And that mutable energy, exactly what you said, I agree with you 100%. You have to remain flexible and open and adaptable when you're dealing with the mutable signs. And so if you have your heart set on some specific site, some specific goal, you don't necessarily need the details filled in right now in order to get there. Especially Mercury is going to be stationing to go direct on the same day on Thursday, just before the new moon happens. So we have Mercury at a standstill. We're not seeing things quite so clearly yet. And then we have all this sort of confusion and watery and Neptunian energy. So it's a really good time, I think, to visualize your goals for the future and to sort of picture what you want and maybe put yourself in that space, right? Because that's what Neptune conjunct Mars is good for, visualizing the action you're going to take. But, maybe don't start anything just yet. Wait until after the holidays, or at least wait, a week or so until this Neptune confusion clears, because I think our blinders are going to be on, our rose-colored glasses will be on. And, we might end up doing something where we overstep and we maybe take it too far or too fast.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is that, I'd be the last person to sort of, denounce some form of celebration at the holidays. It's part of the Jupiter code. It's jovial, people like that at the time. But I'd really watch my alcohol intake on this new moon, especially if you're at a social event or a public event. Like, a little goes a long ways on this new moon. And, you get into that Mars square to the moon, that's anger, right? And you want to really keep an eye out for, sort of righteous indignation. That's an energy you want to stay far away from during the new moon, right? Do you want to be happy, or do you want to be right? Keep that in mind. I'd say keep the alcohol and any other substances kind of at a real minimum, because like I said, a little goes a long ways over this new moon. Interestingly enough, it's not necessarily Jupiter and Sag where the action is. It's Capricorn and Saturn in this chart, which is very different energy. Like, we have the trine to Uranus, we've got the sextile to Neptune and the sextile to Mars, and we have the sextile to Venus. So the real play here is Saturnian, which is about being realistic and grounded and available. If you indulge too much, which is quite possible with this new moon, you're gonna miss things, right? You're gonna miss things. You're gonna miss opportunities. You're gonna miss being able to be grounded. These sextiles can be very, very good for holding space on a spiritual level, right? Mm-hmm. Because sextiles get activated. And, during this new moon, and I know a lot of people out there like to think of themselves as light workers or healers or, esoteric magicians or whatever, right? This could actually be a time during this new moon where you could be called into some form of service. With Saturn and these sextiles, right? Holding the space, measuring your energy. It's more of a kind of a selfless time in some ways, and deferring and delaying gratification versus just indulging and saying, let's let it rip, right? I think the payoff here is Saturn.
Yeah, absolutely. Saturn is very nicely aspected. That makes a lot of sense. So the challenge here is not to overdo it and to stay grounded and use that Saturnian energy, and to use this energy, like you said, towards something maybe charitable, or, where you're utilizing that Neptunian compassion to sort of ignite you into action, right? In a way that's very loving, compassionate, altruistic, doing things like charity work or, that type of thing can be a really good utilization of this energy, I would say. And with Saturn, in these configurations, especially with Venus, right, that's sort of looking at interpersonal relationships and doing things for others, showing up in a way that's very grounded and practical to sort of help other people, provide that foundation. And then you have that trine with Uranus, which is associated with groups of people, right? And so thinking about what's good for the group and not necessarily only what's good for you, and maybe not keeping your sights so narrow in pursuit of whatever goals you have in mind straight ahead, right? With that, because I've noticed with Sagittarius, it's like they'll have their sights set on something, right? It's like that arrow. And, there's wiggle room into how to get there, but like that end goal, that end destination usually tends to stay the same. And so maybe like leaving yourself a little bit open to changing your goals and plans as well. But yeah, I agree with you with the Saturn energy. What do you think on like a more of a global scale that this energy might bring, especially?
It's really interesting. Because there's been some, the last couple days, there's been some very, how do I say this? Synchronistic and charged language that's being used by Mike Pompeo. And Mike Pompeo is he's the Secretary of State, if I'm not mistaken, for Trump. And so, he goes all over the place and negotiates and talks to, Rocket Man in North Korea. And now he was recently in Brussels. And one of the things he talked about was this idea of a liberal world order. I mean, we haven't had this new world order language sort of brought up in a while. And he goes on this, 2 or 3 minute sort of rant about how sovereign nations in the world will be sort of the source of this liberal new world order. And to me, that gets into sort of the Sagittarian piece around all of this, right? Like sort of this global effect and, this sort of language that is, philosophical and to, in some ways, even a bit like perhaps, codedly theocratic. So from a global level, I think we're going to start to get kind of more of, what Pompeo is languaging. I'm a little concerned from a mundane and global level about, and I'll be straight up, the prospects of war with the moon, sun, the new moon, and this square with Mars and Neptune, right? Mars is a war aspect, okay? Now, recently, we just had, again, this is very interesting because of Mars and Pisces and Neptune and Pisces. Just this last week, the rear admiral of the entire fleet in the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, Rear Admiral Scott Sterney, was found dead in his apartment in, I think it was Bahrain. I mean, this guy is one of the most powerful commanders in the world. I mean, he's like the commander of one of the most, admiral, one of the most important and powerful fleets in one of the hottest zones. And theoretically, this guy commits suicide, right? And why would he do that? Did he really commit suicide? Here we go. Here's the Mars-Neptune conjunction. And we're into things like nautical language, oceans, the Navy, right? Mm-hmm. So there's something going on here. Was this guy opposed to a plan that looks like it might be rolled out and hatched? And was he taken out? Or did he, just decide, hey, look, I've had a good run. I've had a great career. I got a wife and kids. And you know what? I'm gonna take myself out. It's a story that was buried, but I think it's very important because in my estimation, and what really gets on my radar is that there's the potential for something happening in that part of the world, and that the Navy may actually be involved. There's an incredible amount of tension right now that's centered around Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United States. If you look at the quote-unquote leaders of all three of the countries, well, 3 out of the 4, actually 4 out of the 4, we have Netanyahu, who's being really kind of pressed for corruption charges. And this has been going on for a while now, but it's starting to come to a head. You have bin Salman and the whole Khashoggi affair, and that's not gone away. There's more and more heat with that. There are people inside of this country, inside of this government, that want him replaced by his older brother. And then, of course, you've got the ongoing Mueller investigation with Trump. Now we have a Congress that is decidedly Democratic. So we have three of these main figures. And by the way, Rouhani, who is the cleric in Iran, is also starting to go through some intense kind of struggle in his quest to stay in power. So you have these four leaders who are literally being squeezed, right? So what happens when leaders are squeezed? They say, I got to get out of this somehow. We got to create either a distraction, or we've got to draw attention to some other kind of part of what we're involved with. So I think that this is a very precarious time for that part of the world, and especially when we get into these squares. Now, I don't want to be a fearmonger, but I will say this, that almost any attack, almost any conflagration starts on a new moon. And the reason for that is that the sky is the darkest, right? There's very little illumination that takes place. So I'm just throwing this out there so that people are aware of this from kind of a global level. And if we're aware of it on a global level, then our attention can potentially change events. This is why I think it's important to understand what's going on, because when we're informed, our attention can alter events. This is the way it works. This is what Heisenberg figured out, right? The difference between the particle and the wave, and the observer and the experiment. So if there's one thing with this aspect, that's the one thing I think we need to kind of pay attention to.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And sort of on the same token, I feel like with the energy of Sagittarius mixed with this sort of Neptunian Mars energy, there could be disputes of a religious nature, right? Because all of these are associated with religion, mysticism, spirituality. And so there could be, some sort of religious dispute that's sort of amplified either in the media or maybe even, involving Israel or, Palestine or some sort of war. And this is also oil, right? Because that's Neptune. Neptune rules oil. And, what's kind of interesting too, have you been following what's been going on in Paris with the protests and the yellow vest?
Yeah, we could talk about that. Yeah.
I feel like there's an association between Mars coming into that conjunction with Neptune and what's been going on in Paris as well. And so this might amplify that, pretty intensely, because you have that aspect coming exact in the new moon squaring it, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Just so people can get up to speed, Macron decided that he was going to raise the price of fuel, and there's a couple of reasons for it, but mainly the reason here is that he wants people to drive less, right? He wants to be able to implement sort of a state-sponsored austerity, which is in alignment with, the quote-unquote global climate crisis. This is part of it. And then the other part of this, right, is to get money to, guess what, fund new refugees coming into France. Now, France, even though it's a socialist country, it has a very strong kind of nationalist, culturalist bent, okay? And you can push the French just so far. And if their lifestyle or their ability to drive a truck or drive a taxi or drive from one place to another to get to work is impinged, the French have a history of revolution, and they're going to push back. And that's exactly what they did. The yellow vest, which is what they've been donning, is required to be in every car in France. So that if you have an emergency, a roadside emergency, you can put the yellow vest on. And somebody knows that they need to call, a tow truck, or the tow trucks that are cruising around the French highways will pull over. They'll see you with the yellow vest, right? It's an apparel of emergency. So what people have done is they've taken those vests and they've taken to the streets. And this gets into that true node at 27 degrees Cancer, which is a really interesting true. It's about the people. The Sabian symbol for 27 Cancer is mind-blowing. It's about homes in a canyon being devastated. And what Dane Rudyard says about that is he talks about these homes as being these sort of small palaces of the elite. And it's about this opportunity to affect change in a static environment. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing the people, right, with the true node in Cancer rise up against this kind of oligarchic South node in Capricorn moment. And you hit it spot on with the Mars-Neptune conjunction, which, pardon the pun, is fueling all this.
Yeah.
It's not getting the press that it deserves in a lot of ways, because I don't know if you saw this, but the highest ranked sort of fire department, fire brigade in France all turned their backs on Macron. They totally shunned him. When Macron had the police force and the army are one and the same in France, by the way. They're under the same rubric. So I believe that he was addressing them, and they all had their helmets off, except for one guy. So this is kind of a big deal, to be honest with you. And it's something to keep an eye on. Now, in a classic Mercury retrograde moment, Macron said, well, we'll put this off for 6 months. Okay. So in some ways he blinked and it was a bit of a win. But listen, some stuff happened. There was a woman that got shot and killed during the protests. And the French take certain things seriously. And one of the things that they take seriously is revolution. When they get motivated, right, they can be very dramatic in that expression. So yeah, you're spot on with it.
And something you just brought up that I hadn't really thought about until just now when you said this, that I think could be an indicator for what we might be seeing more of during the true node, being in Cancer and the south node being in the sign of Capricorn and all the eclipses activating this next year, is that, when you think about Cancer rules like the populace, the common folk, right, in more traditional forms of astrology. And then you have Capricorn, which is the corporatocracy, right? And so the people versus the corporations, the people versus the government, right? That's, I think, what we're going to be seeing a lot more of. And when you have Sagittarius in the mix too, Sagittarius can be, it's very idealistic and altruistic and philosophical and, moral and ethical and all this kind of stuff. But when you have Mars involved, especially with the sign of Sagittarius in this square, Sagittarius can be like aggressively self-righteous. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here. But, rightfully so, I would say, in this particular situation, right? But with Jupiter transiting through the sign of Sagittarius for the next year, we might see more of that, right? People being more open, more upfront, more self-righteous, more sticking to their ideals and fighting for it. And, in a way that I think could be beneficial to people because it's Jupiter, right? It's the great benefic. So whatever Jupiter brings ultimately will supposedly be beneficial for us, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. In this instance, with the square to Neptune and Mars, we have to be really, judicious and very discerning about what might happen on a global level. Sagittarius rules the Orthodox religions. Sagittarius rules things like Islam and Christianity and Judaism, right? And all the different variations and sects and flavors. Pisces is more esoteric. It is Pisces is, Sagittarius represents the form and Pisces the formless. So, this is a very interesting square, right? Because we're dealing with, like the Fertile Crescent is where all these Abrahamic faiths are, that's where they come out of, right? And then we get into this square with Mars and Neptune, and it's like, who's right, who's wrong, who's better, who's got higher ground, who's more righteous, who's been aggrieved, all these things can come up. So just keep your high beams on over the next week. That's my contribution to that.
Absolutely. And I still think this could bring some sort of false flag energy too, even though we saw that like a month ago. Also, by the way, something I forgot to mention last time, because I wasn't planning on talking about it, so I didn't really prepare for it. But when I was looking at those configurations, we had the opposition between Neptune and Mars when we had, what was it? I think it was the Vegas shooting. And then we had Parkland when we had the square between Neptune and Mars. But both times, the timing of the shooting actually corresponded with an activation of the opposition of the eclipse point for the eclipse that happened in America, the Great American Eclipse. So at the end degrees of Aquarius. I think both previous times it was with the moon. This time we had Thousand Oaks, right? And Mars and Neptune were not in a conjunction yet. Mars was actually not even into the sign of Pisces, but Mars was in opposition to that eclipse point, that trigger for the Great American Eclipse that's been sort of corresponding with these events as well. So I think that is where maybe I missed the mark on the timing there, but I still think that there could be a lot of confusion and a lot of strangeness coming out, again, over this next week or so too.
Yeah, I would say that because of the emphasis in Sagittarius, I think it's either international or outside of the country. That's my sense. That doesn't mean it can't happen here. You and I last time were talking about the thing around hospitals. That there were, like the next thing could be a shooting in a hospital or false flag in a hospital. I don't know if you caught this, but early this week they had a active shooter alert in Maryland. Did you catch this? So there was an active shooter alert in Maryland at Walter Reed, which is a major military hospital. It's a big one. It's in Bethesda, right? And so it was, red alert, cops, sheriffs, they were all there at the hospital. And they found at some point, it was like, it was a malfunction in the system, or, it was very kind of sketchy. Now, here's an interesting piece. One of the people that was at the hospital was a congressman from Maryland, a guy by the name of Dutch Ruppersberger. Like, he was there getting some kind of a checkup or a treatment. So he was like tweeting the whole time while this thing was going on. So I have to wonder if him being there at that hospital might have changed sort of the outcome of that event. Like, maybe that was something that was supposed to go live, but because they actually had somebody from Congress there, somebody who actually maybe mattered at some level, that that there would be kind of a hardcore investigation into that event, but maybe they called it off, and it's in the Mercury retrograde kind of cycle as well too. Like, it starts, it happens, it's full on, there's news crews, there's police, there's sheriff, and then there's nothing, right? It was a very odd event, but it was in a hospital. So you and I talked about that. I don't know if Heather can hear me or not. I can't hear you, by the way. You can hear me, right? Yeah, I can't hear you. You just went away. I can hear you now.
Right now, let me put this back. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. It's a little Mercury retrograde. We planned that for you guys. That was demonstration, but now I can't hear you again.
I'm going to use my internal mic because that's just what's going to happen.
Now I hear you again.
It's not going to sound as nice.
Yeah, we planned that first one for you just to show. Hey, you want to hear a weird Mercury retrograde story?
Yeah.
All right. So this was back in 1996, and I was hanging out with a friend of mine behind this really big health food store in San Francisco, and we were waiting to meet up with another friend. So we had some time to kill. We got in, got some juice, and I parked around the corner. And we're sitting there in my van, and he asks me, at that time, Mercury retrograde was in Gemini. And he asked me, what's Mercury retrograde all about? I said, well, in Gemini, it's going to be about people who are in a hurry, trying to get to one place to another. They may not have a lot of patience. And there can be a high degree of accidents. And as soon as I said that, this car comes flying around the corner, and smashes into a parked car.
What?
Yeah, I swear to God. And my friend looked at me. I said, "Yeah, just like that." It was the most synchronistic Mercury retrograde moment, and it kind of freaked me out. I have to say, it freaked me out just a little. But that's when Pluto was on my ascendant, and I had all kinds of crazy stuff like that happening all the time. You got Pluto on your ascendant. Does that happen to you?
Honestly, kind of, yeah. I was gonna say that doesn't happen to me usually, but I mean, it kind of does now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay, so you're going to have to talk louder because your internal mic is not as loud.
I know, I'm annoyed. Hold on, let me fix this.
We don't want to lose your important voice here.
Say something while I fix this. Talk about Mercury Station.
Mercury Station. That would be a good name for like a coffee joint. Mercury Station. Espresso, right? And now you're not. Now I can't hear you again. The gods are conspiring. Mercury is conspiring again. Hermes is playing tricks on you.
Apparently. Oh, I know what I can do. Hold on. I got this.
This is your Virgo astrologer at work here. Look at her. Look at her go, finding a solution.
Okay. Okay. Working?
Not the movie.
Is it working?
Yes.
Yeah, I figured it out.
Right on. Good for
The
you.
sports that I was telling you about, Mac is conspiring to make sure that nobody can use their products properly anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. I mean, even with the iPhones, right? Now they don't have the little thing you just plug in with your headphones. No, you've got to buy the headphone with the new dongle on it so it can plug in there. It's like, come on. Proprietary software is one thing. Proprietary hardware is another, right? Pain in the ass.
Yeah. But let's move on to the next thing now that we have a kind of a good segue here where we stopped.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's move on.
So I do want to just briefly talk about Chiron stationing to go direct because that happens on the 8th, and it's going to be the last time it stations in Aries, and you are sort of the Chiron master. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that energy and what that's going to bring.
Well, I hope it's not more fires.
Yeah.
I really hope it's not more fires because we've had enough fires with the Aries energy. It's been too much, and even with Uranus, retrograding, too much. Anyway, let's see. Hold on a second. Where's Chiron? Let me just check here. Chiron. Yeah, right
27.
there.
Oops.
Yeah. So.
Or Pisces, sorry, not Aries.
27 Pisces, right. I was thinking of Uranus. Chiron at 27 Pisces. Yeah, that's it. Those final degrees of Pisces are interesting because they're the final degrees of the zodiac.
Yeah.
And it feels like an opportunity to put old wounds and old pain together and really let go of them, right? To really let go of kind of a cycle for everybody. And the new cycle, of course, we're going to move into Chiron and Aries, which is about how do we deal with our lives and be will directed, theoretically I don't like the word getting our power back. It never really went away, but being able to be in a place where we're more open and vulnerable to actually directing our energy, our power, taking risks, right? I think Chiron and Aries is about taking a risk. And these final degrees of Pisces are the end of a story. They're the end of a story. They're the end of, this idea of being victimized or scapegoated or wherever it's showing up in your chart. It's time to make a bundle of your sadness and send it out to sea. Because when we move into Chiron and Aries, I really believe, I'll give you another kind of interpretation and level of this. So when we're children, we kind of get a pass in some ways, like, because we're not wise, or we haven't lived. So we tend to get a pass every now and then. We get a pass from our parents, or we get a pass from the school, and we get a pass in a cosmic sense. Forgive them, for they know not what they do, right? But at a point, we're no longer children. We move out of that phase, and we don't get passes anymore. Our parents don't give us passes. At least we hope they don't. Schools, work, whatever. And even from the perspective of the cosmic level, that the forces that cohere this universe, that want us to mature and be really strong, interdependent, empowered and loving people, even at that phase, we don't get passes anymore. Like, we've learned enough, we've known enough, right? It's about putting things away. What I did as a child, that's when I was a child. And it feels like this Chiron in Pisces is the end of that cycle. And that when it moves into Aries, we all, and this is a tricky part, we all have to become accountable for our actions, for our will, for our energy. I don't think there's any more free passes. I feel like this Piscean cycle is sort of the end of the free pass, especially when it goes into Aries. And this is it. These last few degrees, it's like, let it go. Figure out what it is that you've been holding on to. Figure out what hasn't served you. If it's a victim mentality, if it's something that you've used for a long time as a crutch, get it out of your life. I really feel like this is the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And I've definitely been feeling that energy. So I think that that's pretty spot on. And I'm sure other people have been feeling it as well. So Chiron, stationing to go direct in Pisces, that's going to be happening around the time of the new moon as well. This is a really big sort of energy at the end of this week. And then after that, things get, a little bit easier. So as we come into the winter solstice and the full moon in Cancer, which is this chart right here, there are a lot of really powerful sort of trines happening. So instead of having a Mars-Neptune conjunction exact, we have, Venus trining Neptune, which comes exact on the 21st, which is the solstice. We have the sun as part of the configuration for the winter solstice coming into a trine with Uranus also. And then, so there's a lot of different stuff going on here with this full moon, but a lot of it seems to be quite positive, just in terms of the configurations that are going on here. So what would you say about, because this is happening right after the solstice, right? So this is highlighting that energy at 0 degrees in the sign of Cancer.
So what's really interesting is the Sabian symbol for 1 Cancer, which is a sailor at sea lowers one flag and raises another. And it's a symbol of a changing allegiance, right? I mean, kind of the overriding representation of that symbol goes back to the Bolshevik War, which really started with the Russian Navy, and the Russian Navy defecting from the Tsar. And what they did is they lowered one flag and they raised another, right? It's like they were raising this new flag that represented their new allegiance. But this is the Sabian symbol for 1 Cancer. And what it feels like to me is that we're in a time where people are questioning not necessarily in a negative way, but they're questioning their allegiance to certain things, right? Really mundane level. Let's say you've always bought Nike apparel, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you look around and say, I'm not digging what Nike is pumping out or shilling to me. I'm going to make a change. I mean, that's a really mundane level, right? Like, I'm not going to buy this product anymore. I'm not going to support this company anymore. I'm going to support this other representation, but it can also, I think it really gets down into the roots of what we've been talking about with the true node in Cancer. And that, to me, this full moon represents a shift. And when we get into full moons, we get into illumination. Mm-hmm. And we get into this being able to see very clearly kind of the opposite side of where this full moon is, right? we've got Saturn in Capricorn, we've got the sun in Capricorn. So this full moon is illuminating this kind of Capricornian corporocratic sort of structure and format that, we've inherited really for all intents and purposes the last 2,000 years. So I think this is a really important full moon because we're dealing with that true node over there at the end of 26 and this point of illumination. And so we're able to see more clearly, in a lot of ways, what we don't want. And as a result of that, we can begin to build a new allegiance towards something else, which is that symbol of raising a new flag.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of on the other end of that, with the full moon being in the sign of Cancer on sort of more of a personal level, this is an excellent energy, I would say, for connecting with your family, connecting with your home, your roots, going home to visit your family if you live far away, connecting with your emotions, connecting with your comfort zones. But doing so, I would say, in a new way, right? Because this is the moon in a sextile with Uranus. So changing your relationship with your family in a positive way, I would say, or connecting with them in a new way that could be, exciting for you, or, it could bring a lot of benefits. But connection with, family, roots, people that you care about the most, which is, what this time of year is supposed to be about, right? So I think this is a really great energy for that as well.
Yeah. I mean, staying with that flag metaphor, for the last 2 years, we've literally lived in a house divided, at least in this country.
Yeah.
Other parts of the world, maybe not as much, so people were, going into their family events, flying a skull and bones, right? Here I am,
Yeah.
shot across the bow. And maybe the new flag for, this time of year with this full moon would be a white flag, surrender. Hey, I surrender. We surrender. Come on. Like you're not old enough to remember this, but back when I was a kid, they had the Vietnam War, right? It was the Vietnam War. And then every year they would have like a ceasefire, right around Christmas. Christmas Eve would be a ceasefire. American troops wouldn't theoretically fire on other troops. There's a really amazing story that goes back to World War I, where there's a ceasefire between the Germans and the French. And they get together and they put their weapons down and they smoke cigarettes and they drink whatever available booze they have, and they talk about their families and their lives. The insanity is they, a couple days later, they take it back up again and start, shooting at each other. But there's this potential for a ceasefire that's embedded in this time of year. So you may want to think about that. Give it some thought. It's part of the cycle.
Yeah. And, with Neptune in this really nice trine with Venus, which rules like relationships, right? And our connections with other people, I think we're going to be feeling a lot more compassionate, a lot more loving, a lot more giving, but in a positive way, right? Not where it's like a square where it's like we're not seeing things clearly and then we're delusional. It's like, hey, I see that we're all connected. I feel compassion and empathy for your situation. I want to help you. I want to connect with you. I think that it's a really nice energy for the holidays to have this really nice trine here. And so that kind of falls along the same token.
Yeah, Venus is highly supported, right? Sextile to the sun, sextile to Saturn, wide sextile to the sun, sextile to Saturn, sextile to Pluto, trine to Neptune, trine to Mars. I mean, look, if you're really interested in building a bridge and having some healing in a family situation, I think this period is a great time for it. Don't miss the opportunity. Because I'll tell you what, we always talk about how we always wish we would have said things to people before they passed away, right? We don't know what the world is going to look like in 6 months or a year. We think we do. We think like everything's just going to go along in this kind of linear fashion until, either the sun runs out or the oil runs out or the money runs out, right? But there are no givens, right? There are no givens in this world. And if you are presented with an aspect like this with your family, and you need to build a bridge, you need to bury a hatchet, I would say take advantage of it. Take advantage of it, because we just don't know. We just don't know. And the energies here are really fantastic.
Yeah, they are. And we also have the sun trining Uranus as part of this too. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good energy here where we can make some really positive changes to our family relationships and our relationships in general. And even with Venus being in Scorpio, Venus obviously doesn't do super well in Scorpio. It's at its fall there, but it's really nicely supported. And the thing I like about Venus in Scorpio is that it helps people to form really deep, intimate bonds with other people. And so, that's something that you can work on doing, deepening your intimacy, in terms of your relationship with your family members, with your spouse, with the people that you care about the most, getting to know people like on that deeper level and forging those really deep connections. So, I think this is a really nice time of year. I'm really happy that we have a really nice energy for the holidays for a change.
Yeah, and just a day later, the moon moves into trine with Venus.
Yeah, it does. It'll be a grand trine.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So that's kind of like, the icing or the cherry on top of the sundae or whatever you want to use as a metaphor, right?
Yeah. So plan all of your holiday gatherings maybe for the weekend before Christmas or a couple days. I don't know if that's the weekend or not, but around the solstice.
Analogy, not a metaphor. Yeah, right around. So, it feels like it's a pretty high quality holiday season. Just keep the expectations in check. Don't drink too much. Keep your high beams on. Go for the long play. Have some reserve a little bit. Savor the moments. Savor the moments. Right.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what's going on until the end of the month. There's not a lot of craziness. We get into, eclipse season next month and some interesting energy there. But yeah, until then, get through this week, I would say, and don't jump in too fast. Just calm it down, rein it in, make sure that you see the picture clearly before you start launching into all these new directions, and maybe, take some time over the holidays to think things through, or just to rest and relax, and then, come back in the new year fresh, because there's a lot of energy happening at the start of the year. We launch right into, an eclipse happening on January 6th. Which is
Mars goes into Aries on the 2nd.
Oh yeah, Mars does go into Aries on the 2nd.
Yeah.
So
that'll be just a kick-ass energetic time.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be good. It's coming out of Pisces finally, and so it'll be interesting.
That's happening while the Sun conjunct Saturn too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So they won't be totally in square. That comes later. That Mars Saturn square comes later, but if you wanted to start a new exercise program, or you had an idea that you wanted to jump on, starting on the 2nd of January, that energy is, it's really available to you. It's like go get 'em energy.
Absolutely. And so like the way that I was thinking about it is that Mars jumps into Aries, right? Mars in Aries is very impulsive. It's really good at starting things, but it's not necessarily good at carrying it out and seeing it through. So it's like jumping into a New Year's resolution and like not doing it like for very long. But when you have Sun conjunct Saturn, Saturn gives you that grounded energy and that sort of sense of delayed gratification and hard work and discipline. And so combining those two energies, even though they will come into square, a couple weeks later during eclipse season and all that, it's still, you can combine those energies to initiate and launch into something all enthusiastically and all passionately, and to actually take the necessary measures to see it through.
Yeah, that means you might actually honor your gym membership this year.
Yeah. That is accurate. All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts or anything else that you want to discuss before we sign off today?
No, I just wanted to tell, excuse me. I just wanted to tell people that, I'm going to be doing my Thinking Astrologically and Beyond webinar that starts on the 8th. So it's going to go for 6 weeks. And it's an hour and a half every Saturday. It's not going to be terribly long, but you're going to get 6 weeks out of it. We're going to run 3 Saturdays in a row, break for the holidays, and come back for the next 3 Saturdays. And if the response is good and people enjoy it, we can continue to do this on Saturdays. It's a lot like the stuff that I did at Gaia, and looking at mundane material. And thinking astrologically, looking at things in the world and making connections, and, connecting with this holographic brain or this holographic mind. And there'll be other aspects to it, like archetypes and thinking metaphorically. So we're going to start off on Saturday. And Saturday, of course, is Saturn's Day. We're going to be talking about Saturn and kind of where we are with Saturn culturally and mythologically. So there's going to be some astrology here, but it's kind of like some people are better at quantum physics and algebra. They understand things at a higher level. And that's what I, like in this class too. So you don't have to know a ton about astrology. You can just dive in and kind of look at this from like a Joseph Campbell perspective or, Carolyn May's perspective. So that's starting this Saturday.
Okay, cool. And so this sounds like, because I was looking at your website, it sounds like it's going to be pretty interactive, which seems pretty cool for people who want to join in. What if people are not able to make all of the classes? It's going to be recorded?
Yeah. Everybody will. If you can, let's say you missed the first one, you'll get a copy of the class. It'll be on video, visuals, syllabus, whole 9 yards. So the experiential piece is kind of an intention and a goal that I have to see where over time, kind of our thoughts or our ideas or the things that we're talking about and sharing to see if they pop up in the world, right? So, there's your guy.
I just spooked her with my laugh.
What's her name?
Her name's Midi.
Midi.
Midi, M-I-D-I, like a MIDI.
MIDI computer, Midi.
Yeah. She's gonna be attending your webinar. She's very perceptive.
Okay, well, she can bond with Jasper. They can have a mind meld.
Yeah, and I'll post for those who are watching this on my channel. I'll post a link to your webinar, in the description below, so people can access it real easily. And Matt and I are going to try to be there too, but we might not be there live a couple of the classes, so you might see us there.
So, and you've got a whole batch of students you've taken on, right?
Yeah, I'm just about to wrap up my first foundational astrology course. It's been going really well, and I've been really impressed with the students and how they've come along and how they're putting the material together. So I'm excited. I'll have a new batch in the spring after the new year that I'm going to be doing. But
okay,
that's what I'm up to. So
well, great. All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for doing this with me again.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's always great connecting with you, Heather.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you next month.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.